welcome. We're so excited to be here at the Moncton Public Library today. My name is Hilary LeBlanc, this is Clinton Davis, and we'll get a little into our work in a second, but first Clinton's going to explain these beautiful QR codes in between us.
Oh, just very simple. These are the QR codes to both our website at blackatlantic.ca, and if anyone wants to check us out, although we're going to explain what we do in just a moment, and on Instagram.
Yeah, we'll put them back up at the end if anyone feels that we've done a good enough job and want to follow us along, although I know a few of you in the audience already do, but just to keep track of the good work we're trying to do in the community.
It is...
You speak English very fast, huh?
I can slow down.
Okay,
actually, it was our goal to speak slower.
It is our goal to speak slower.
Because there is a lot of reverberations
There
here.
is a lot of
acoustic
echo.
is not good, so that's and my ears are not so good.
You're absolutely right. We tried to use the microphones that they had, but there seemed to be some kind of feedback. So we are going to speak slower. Thank you for bringing that up.
Not very loud. You don't need to speak very loud.
Okay. I accept the feedback. Where were we? We do want everyone to know that none of your faces will be seen. As you can see, there are cameras here, and we are live streaming this to YouTube. So.
And TikTok.
And TikTok.
Because we're trying to keep up with the trends.
So while we don't imagine that happening, if any of you, for any reason, were to get up and come into the frame of the cameras, we would then ask you to simply sign a release or consent form, giving permission for your face to have been shown on the video. So, do you want to start with the...
Yeah, so I will start with a land acknowledgement before we get going here. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land with which we are gathered today is the traditional and ceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik, Maliseet, and Mi'kmaq peoples. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship with which the Wolastoqiyik, Maliseet, and Mi'kmaq people first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized the Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik and Maliseet title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. We're very happy to be having this conversation on this territory and here with the Moncton Public Library. We're going to obviously be discussing, hopefully all of you know, the early presence of Black communities in New Brunswick and the presence of the KKK, Ku Klux Klan in New Brunswick, and as you mentioned, Hilary and Clinton of Blackatlantic.
I will take a moment to ask, are we speaking slower? Are we too loud?
You could speak even less.
No,
but
that's okay.
I'm not the only one here.
There's 7 of you here, so it's important that you all are able to hear us. Obviously this room, I feel I'm speaking quite quiet, so obviously this room picks up sound really well. And I'll keep that in mind. We are Blackatlantic, obviously Blackatlantic. We'd like to point out that we are not technically historians. We are passionate podcasters who for the past 2.5 to 3 years have been working together to highlight Black stories within Atlantic Canada, more so New Brunswick than not, although we try to cover PEI, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland as much as we can. We, of course, try to educate, break down stereotypes, and just because of our passion, we have dug into the deep history of New Brunswick, the Black people who were here hundreds of years ago, as well as all the diverse cultures from all over the world that have come here since. We've released over 60 episodes of our show so far, over 2 seasons. We've done work with CBC on multiple occasions. We worked with Rogers Television to produce video content. We've done a number of panels and workshops, but I would say this is the first one of this sort of nature, so we're excited and nervous to be up here. And we've also worked with the New Brunswick Education Department in helping to reshape some of their curriculum. You're much better at explaining the curriculum part.
Well, actually, it's in a slide that we're going to elaborate on more more later, but obviously I think part of the discussion in nature around discussing Black history and KKK is to really amplify that it's important that we discuss all of this, that it becomes part of the Black history curriculum, and that we were able to work on that curriculum, and we hope it takes effect very soon. But we will get into a bit, obviously, why that's so important to us. I don't know if there's anything you missed. This is an excerpt from our website, just sort of highlighting what our mission and our purpose is. Working with organizations on diversity, equity, and inclusion, initiatives that add a more inclusive community, obviously the Black Atlantic community, and that, you know, we want to do all of this to eventually pay and engage other Black members in all 4 Atlantic provinces, so that we're not the only 2 people doing this, and so that we can get more feedback from all of the provinces, because we can't be everywhere at the same time, but we feel all of them deserve the equity of having their stories to be told.
Absolutely, yeah. And not to say that we're not the only people doing this, but we're probably one of the only podcasts of our kind. There was another podcast in New Brunswick that exists. I don't believe they've put out content in a while, but there are numerous organizations throughout New Brunswick and in Canada also dedicated to this, which we actually want to thank and acknowledge for where we have gotten a lot of our information. The New Brunswick Historical Society, I know you're going to speak about provincial archives, many families from St. John and Fredericton who have been on this land for hundreds of years. I myself, my origins are from Jamaica and Britain, and Hillary's origins on one side is...
I'm Senegalese Acadian. My mom's from Emmercook. But we'll be doing this in English for the sake of today. But yeah, that's my origin story. And to transition a little bit, starting to get into the meat of the content, just want to obviously say that some of this might be triggering to anybody in the room. This is very much conversation-based. If you are uncomfortable at any point in time, you need to step out. It gets overwhelming for anybody. Feel free to come in and out as you please. We do have a little bit of a break in the middle, but just in case we do talk for 2 hours, that might be a long time to sit. And as mentioned, we do really want to thank the Provincial Archives. I've been blessed to have a friend who works there who's able to give me 19 pages of links that then link to more documents. Just the letters alone that we're going to discuss were 300 pages of letters over the course of 15 years between the KKK and other organizations, affiliations, people in the community. But we do want to share that knowledge. So if anyone is interested, our email is blackatlantic@gmail.com, and I'm willing to send out the 19-page resource list so that you can go and search anything you'd like, because Provincial Archives are available to everybody. Linda, do you want to talk about?
Hillary, you said your mother was from Emmercook?
She's a Memramcookian, yes.
Which part of Emmercook?
Old Shediac Road. The house is actually still there, and I still have family who live there. She lived there till she was 6, and then moved to the city for school in French, and went to what is now Aberdeen Centre. Yeah.
Can I ask who where your father's from?
He's the one from Senegal, so he came here actually.
Senegal.
Oui, Senegal. So he came here to go to UDM.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, and then I happened, and now I get to talk to all of you.
So, just another question regarding your mother. What's her family name?
She's a Melanson.
Melanson, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, my grandmother's a Melanson, and she's from that area too, so hey.
We're cousins. We're cousins. The room's getting warmer by the minute.
Uh-oh.
Different?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will speak as well as I can about the history of Black communities in New Brunswick, and from time to time I'll refer to Hillary just for her own thoughts and feedback on the topic. Before I speak about Black communities, I want to discuss the term Black. So, you know, I grew up living the experience of a Black person. However, I firmly believe that we are all shades of the same color. I believe we're all different shades of beige and brown. I know many of us call ourselves Black, identify as Black, and are proud to be Black, and we should be. But I also want to note that the term Black is a made-up word. The term black was a word that was made up by the Portuguese in, I believe, either the 14 or 1500s. The king had contracted a writer to write a document separating humans. And if you look really far back in history, before this period, there is no historical reference or context really that describes any human beings as being either white or black. They were simply people from wherever they were from, nations, communities, and as such. So the creation of terms like white and black were actually created to justify the transatlantic slave trade and to further divide us. I think we all know the world is very divided right now and continues to be. Through social media, there's a lot of polarization and such like that. So just to start, I want to reiterate that, we are all part of the same diaspora of human beings.
Is it possible that they came out with the word black because the N-word was not acceptable? I
don't believe the word N-word existed at that time period.
In the United States, they didn't call them?
Well, I'm speaking from around like the 1400s to the 1500s, which would have been right at the onset of the transatlantic slave trade. And to be honest, I don't know when the term, the N-word became...
We've discussed this on a podcast before. I'm pretty sure it is actually a derivative of the Spanish word for black. But they had to first come up with a Spanish word for black, and then obviously make it a word that was malicious. So the N-word does stem from the word black, but that idea of naming people after a color when we are not black, which is the absence of color, is all the background, the history that you just gave. It's sort of a made-up term that then slur came from.
It was used for the colonization.
Yes.
And it was used for colonization.
That was a good question. Thank you. One other thing before I get into history of black communities in New Brunswick is something just very interesting I came across in the past couple of years. So this is a theory. It's believed by many and not completely accepted by other scholars due to lack of archaeological evidence or documentation. But there was a book written in the 1970s by Ivan van Sertima in which he theorizes that the ancient African empire of Mali in West Africa actually did travel to the Americas hundreds and hundreds of years before European colonizers found this land, where, of course, indigenous people already were. His arguments for that is that there are references to documents where indigenous people describe people with dark skin having sailed across the ocean through the Middle Passage, an area of water that is quite easy to traverse, and West Africans did used to be shipbuilders. Also the similarities between the pyramids found in Colombia and West Africa, as well as when Europeans arrived in that part of the Americas, there were already African crops growing there that were not native to that region of the world, and so that hasn't been explained. Although, again, just a theory, but very interesting. So now I'll move on to New Brunswick history. So the first reference of black people arriving in New Brunswick originated in the 17th century, sometime in the 1690s. After that, there isn't much mention, but after the American Revolutionary War in the late 18th century, where black people in the southern states were promised their freedoms. Sorry, that's not true. There are references to slaves being in New Brunswick before that. But black people volunteered to fight in the American Revolutionary War with the promise of being freed by the Brits after the war. So around that time, I believe it was either in 1798, it was in the late 1790s that about 3,500 people arrived on the shores of both Nova black settlers, or loyalists, or as some people refer to them nowadays as black arrivees. There is discussion about the term loyalist being inappropriate. But New Brunswick has always been left out of that narrative. They arrived on the shores of St. John, again, approximately 3,500, some of them free, some of them slaves, and that's where they settled. There was another influx of black people from America arriving after the Civil War of 1812. But one thing that's interesting to note is that black people have been here for hundreds of years, at least 300 years. And so when you hear in modern times of people saying, go back to your country or go back to where you're from, this knowledge really helps because many families, many communities, many black people, again, and this land really is indigenous land, but black people have been here as long as Europeans have been here. So they have those same claims. In fact, we're close friends with people who have 7 generations of black going back on the same land, and their families have been here the entire time. But so it just goes to show that black individuals definitely shaped the cultural landscape and historical landscape of New Brunswick, sometimes intentionally, and again, sometimes due to slavery.
So St. John was the most populated?
Yeah, the first historic black settlement was in a place called Elm Hill, which is not far out of St. John. I don't believe that region doesn't exist anymore, although there are still signage and tributes to the people that were there. I don't touch on that in this presentation, but Mary Louise McCarthy.
Mary Louise McCarthy Brandt. Yeah.
She has done numerous studies on ancient, hundreds of years old grave sites of black communities that are still there, tombstones that have been buried, uncovered at the bottom of rivers, just really forgotten history that she has done amazing work in bringing to light.
I'll elaborate on that. I literally just wrote an article about New Brunswick Power to extend the Mactamak Dam, turned a Negro cemetery. They put it at the bottom of the water. There were call-outs in the paper, however, no one came to attest and collect those lost souls, and so Mary Louise, this happened in the 1960s, Mary Louise found out in the 90s, and was able to, there was a stone that was broken in 3, and with some back and forth with NB Power, was able to somewhat rectify the situation by erecting a new stone, naming the people much more properly. But we've also done some discussions in Elm Hill as well, as they had a Negro school. It was one of the only segregated schools, and there also is archival research and papers on that as well, and a list of the students who were segregated there. And in the end, they were looking for teachers. White people didn't want to teach that school, and it ended up closing, and eventually it looks to me, based on the research, as if those kids just never got a proper education, and eventually we get to the school system we have now. But there is a period of time where for years there's just this back and forth with the school and the government saying these kids need to be taught, and them saying, well, where's a white woman willing to teach these 10 black kids? And in much harsher language. So that does exist at the provincial archives, and I do want to highlight it's Mary Louise McCarthy Brandt and her cousin Jennifer Dow have done a lot of this research. They do talks, they're doing walks and talks, and a lot of education in the St. John and Fredericton area. So
are they remembered? Like, is there anything there to be remembered? Like, for
the cemetery, there is now a new stone that NB Power worked with, and I believe there's Elm Hill signage about the school. But everything that I looked at was archival facts about what happened in the past. There wasn't I think I might have been there wasn't any articles about it that was recent, and we talked about it during Black History Month, so I hadn't seen any footage about it before then.
If you have questions, please ask, and again, we will do our absolute best to answer everything to the best of our knowledge, and hope that we are as accurate as possible.
Or we will definitely put you in touch with the right historians, too. Definitely. Yeah.
So, between the two wars, when approximately the 5,500 to 6,000 black people arrived here, as you can imagine, just because they were made promises by the Britons to had land. I don't know if it was exactly 40 acres, but they were promised land. And while they were allowed to come here, and while there were many Europeans, there were some Europeans that were supportive and helpful. In general, black people were not widely accepted in New Brunswick. So even though there were slaves, and even though they were free, they did not get their land right away. The government was not very open to working with these communities, and so there were many letters that had to be written, not protests, but many discussions and arguments that had to take place for them to have anything at all. Eventually, land was given to many of these settlers on the contract that they would have to be able to make it fertile within X amount of years. However, the land they were given was awfully dense, rocky, quite infertile, covered in dense forest. As you can imagine, back then, clearing forest was much harder than it is today. And not only that, they were as far as humanly possible for that time period from any settlements or communities in which they would be able to get food, water, tools, and just the basic amenities for survival. So after the War of 1812, it did take, I don't know the exact amount of years, but it did take a long time for any of this to have effect. I think I'm jumping a bit out of order here from what is shown here. Is Sierra Leone happened before or after 1834?
I couldn't tell you the date, but it's in response to the infertile land that the lieutenant goes back to France and then founds the Sierra Leone Company.
So there was a gentleman. I'm just going to
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Okay, so the Black Loyalists, are they the ones who arrived in St. John, the first to arrive in New Brunswick?
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay, which means...
Not the first black people to arrive in New Brunswick.
Yeah.
There was slavery in New Brunswick.
Oh, okay, but loyalists, where does that come from? Does that mean they belonged to a certain religious group or a certain...
No, the term loyalist, and again, which is... Terms are given to people, and over years, sometimes those terms become not accurate. So loyalists refer to their loyalty to Britain for choosing to fight in the war against what is now known as America, as America was trying to separate from Britain. So Britain promised the black people in the States, if you fight for us, after this war is done, you will be rewarded with your freedom. So that's why they are called the Loyalists. And so they were free, and they came to New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. They were free. However, many other families did own black slaves during that time. Not as much as in the States, and of course, you know, there wasn't a cotton industry in Canada due to our harsh weathers like there would be in the southern states. But slaves, they basically did farm work, took care of families, ran chores, did errands, but they were slaves. They had no rights, they had no freedoms, they weren't considered citizens or I believe even humans under the law.
And which part did you say that they were from, they came from, like, okay, so, like, when they came to America, where did they come from, the ones who were in New Brunswick? Like, where did they?
From America?
Yeah, like, which country or which, like...
I thought historically we knew that, I think it says in the book Blacks in New Brunswick that some of them were Jamaican Maroons that had come to America, right?
That, and I'll, of course, never make up anything I don't know. I don't know what part of America the American Revolutionary War was fought in. I don't even know if the states were labeled at the time, what they are now.
Like, it would have been, like, Western Africa, right?
Oh!
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying Jamaica. I thought it was Jamaicans that went to America and then became free, came to Canada.
That could be. Jamaica is a whole other story with the Maroons.
Right.
The Maroons are a community of slaves in Jamaica that the Brits could never control. From the moment they arrived in Jamaica, they were warriors, they were resistance fighters, they fled, they escaped, they set up in really up on cliffs and in rocky settlements in which like literally the Britain could not control them, they could not capture them. and they became so powerful that eventually Britain signed agreements with them to just leave them be. They both agreed to a ceasefire, and they found a way to give them their space and live, and they just kind of ceded that. Those people forced their freedom and they attained it. Woo!
Okay, so we're just not sure, like, where they were, which part of, like, Africa they came from.
It's my understanding that they didn't bring them over from Africa for the purpose of fighting. It's my understanding that they were already there because Britain owned America. It was the Brits that came over. My understanding is it was probably the undesired Brits or the ones that were politically opposed to the ruling power at the time who they sent over here thinking that they could control them as yet another British colony that eventually decided to fight for their independence. And so there was already a number of British people here, and I believe, so they already had their governments and establishments and soldiers, they certainly brought more over, but for the ones who wanted to separate from them, they created the American Revolutionary War.
This article from St. John explaining how Black people came to the area that is now St. John says that from 1813 to 1816, the second most important group of Black people that came to the Maritimes were escaped slaves from Virginia and Maryland.
Okay.
So I don't know how they got to Virginia and Maryland, but they would have come from there, escaped, and then been allowed their freedom in an area that's now St. John. And it was approximately 2,000 Black people, with 400 to 500 of them settling in New Brunswick, and then the other approximate 1,500 being in Nova Scotia.
Okay, so Virginia, okay.
Yeah, in Maryland. Yeah.
We really appreciate these questions because one thing that Hillary and I say on our podcast almost weekly is one of our favorite parts about doing what we do is learning. We have guests every other week, and sometimes we just discuss topics. And so we learn every week from the people that we interview, whoever they are, whether it be a lawyer, a doctor, an entertainer, a high school student, a historian, or something like that. So while I didn't know the answer to your question, I'm so grateful that Hillary looked it up.
I knew that there was an article.
Yeah, and that's why we like to say at the beginning, we're not historians, we're passionate people who just have a zest for wanting to share this information.
Okay,
So, thank you as well. Did the video go off?
We're good.
That's okay. So the next part I'm going to talk about, I'm not going to be 100% on the timeline. But at one point, there was a gentleman named James Thomas, or Thomas James, who kind of became a revolutionary. He recognized that Black people were made a promise here in New Brunswick, and they weren't getting what they wanted or were promised. So working with some of the European people here, he himself traveled to France, which was the ruling colony at the time. Is that correct? I know when we were on CBC...
It's Thomas Peters.
Thomas Peters.
And it was in 1785 that the Royal Charter incorporated the city in 1785, and then there was restrictions on Black communities, and that's when he organized this exodus that we're about to discuss.
And he went to Britain, speak to the King of Britain.
You know St. John, or what is it?
So he sailed across to petition to have people in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia who were not happy with what was happening in Canada have the right to leave and actually go back to Africa. And he was successful. So he came back, and the king decreed, whichever friends have written, I apologize, we will try to get that information before the end of this panel, that the local governments in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia had to work together with Thomas
Peters. Thomas Peters in 1792.
Thomas Peters to help organize and arrange for any Black people who wanted to leave Nova Scotia and New Brunswick to give them ships, give them supplies, and make sure they made safe passage back to Africa. So about 1,200 people decided to go. It was quite the voyage. I believe they took the trip with about 40 different ships. And this is actually a really surprising thing that we found out last year. They sailed back to Africa to Sierra Leone and were an integral part of founding the city that is now known as Freetown. So Freetown is the capital of Sierra and generationally it is actually full of numerous people that had been living over here in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia for years. So they still have a rich connection to this area. I'm not sure what the last names, I've never been to Freetown, but it's very well known over there that that city was settled by Nova Scotians and New Brunswickers. Yeah. Now, of course, the people that went over there likely were not from Sierra Leone. Their lineage and their links to their ancestral families and cultures and traditions and music, while retained as much as possible, would have been broken. But still, it's an interesting story to know that a number of people actually, Africans actually left from North America to found the capital of a country over there in West Africa.
So he actually ended up being the founding father of the entire nation of Sierra Leone. He was enslaved in North Carolina and escaped and joined the British forces. So he asked Britain if he could found the Sierra Leone Company and went. And he was originally born in Yorubaland and ended up dying in Freetown of malaria, but ended up marrying and having children and being one of the founding fathers of that whole nation.
Thank you to the internet.
Yeah, that's why there's two of us. One person says something and I fact check.
Did any remain in St. John?
Yes, many. So not everyone left. I don't know the numbers, but I know that 1,200 people left. But again, many families stayed. And there's a number of families that, again, we just ran into someone today who's a 7th generation New Brunswicker with Black heritage. I'm not going to call you out again. I don't know how far back your lineage goes back in this province. But yeah, so many absolutely stayed. There is a project taking place right now being funded by the Canada Council of the Arts, in which 2 people, Tom DeWay and Gary Weeks, from living in Fredericton, are traveling around New Brunswick, interviewing many of the original families that have been here for hundreds of years, documenting, making scans of some of their family documents, any photos they have, any historical things, photos of the family that still exist right now. And that book should be coming out in the next year or 2. So I'm sure that will be widely publicized on places like CBC and such like that. So a little sneak peek of that. But yeah, so in 1834, Britain officially declared the abolition of slavery. As you can imagine, just because a law was passed that freed slaves, that didn't mean that overnight they were suddenly accepted, desired, wanted, liked, given opportunities, given jobs or anything like that. It was still quite a tough journey for the slaves that were freed. Because of those factors, slavery then transitioned to indentured servitude, where technically they were not slaves, but because they couldn't survive here in this land they'd been given, they had to sign contracts in which they would essentially, even worse than some of the jobs we hold nowadays, sign away their life for 7 years for no pay. They would have to live in the home where they worked in almost all cases. And while they were kind of free to move around a little bit more, they still really couldn't build a life for themselves because they had no money, they couldn't vote, they had no rights under the laws, my understanding, or anything like that. Right before the break, I will try to show some documents that are not in this actual presentation. Wrote numerous news clipping articles from the late 1700s, early 1800s, in which people were looking for their runaway slaves, offering rewards for found slaves, talking about court cases that took place that involved black slaves, and as well, I don't have it on me today, but even receipts, bills of sale for human beings that took place right here on the land that we live on, here in New Brunswick and St. John. Humans were selling human beings, and there's old documents that we got from Meredith Batt at the Provincial Archives that document that. So, regardless of all that, Black communities here were resilient. They fought, they stayed. They could have left and they didn't. They built families here. There are many famous Black New Brunswickers, and I will note that of the land that was given to them, eventually, not all, but many families gave up, and that also put them into indentured servitude. It's not that they weren't talented farmers. They've been slaves for generations. That's what they did. They farmed, they worked the land, they grew cotton, they picked cotton, they knew how to work with animals. They knew what to do. They just weren't given the opportunity to do it. So many of these people's children, they would just forfeit the land. And I can't remember the details from the book. Feel free to chime in here. Weren't there many instances in which they gave up the land and, European settlers would just kind of reclaim it and take it over?
Yes.
Do you recall that? Yeah.
Yes.
So the land that they were given ended up having to be forfeited regardless. And well, there are still.
Can you give me the definition of indentured?
Indentured is just someone who is signed contractually to stay with the family, to commit to a family. This also happened to Scottish or Irish people that came to Canada in that time period. It's not to say, and we will talk about this when we get to the KKK part, that.
What would be another word, like for you?
So indentured servitude is a form of labor where an individual is under contract without a salary to repay an indenture or a loan within a certain time frame. So it's almost like working for free, as almost like an IOU. It's like I owe you something. So for an indefinite period of time, I work for you without any repayment.
How would they eat and like?
That would be part of the payment.
I think that would be part of the
contract. Would be room and board and food.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay,
No pay.
right, okay.
And yeah, I apologize. It was either Scottish or Irish. When their economy collapsed, many refugees fled to Canada. Well, not fled, but there was no money to be made there.
Yeah.
So over here in Canada, people would sign them up for 7-year contracts, which would pay for them to be able to come across to Canada, work for 7 years. I don't know if they were paid, but possibly be able to send some money back home to their family or not. But yeah, Black people weren't the only one who were certainly prejudiced against in Canada at that time.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Did they move in New Brunswick? And I asked a question because when I was a young guy, there was not a black person in Moncton. I did not see a black person for quite a few years. And the only ones that I would see was when we took the train, the porters were from Nova Scotia. So they were at the door of the train, and that's the first time that I was. Did the others move?
Actually, there was never really any, historically speaking, black families that settled in Moncton. So that would probably explain why you never saw them. Most of the settlement took places in areas like St. John, Elm Hill, like as I mentioned, even Fredericton. But the truth is, there isn't a deep history of black settlers in Moncton. And that is likely why you never saw any. Did you travel much while you were young?
My father was a trainman, and we would go to Montreal practically every year. And the only time I would see black people was when we were at the Moncton station and on the train.
Yeah, sorry, I should have asked. I guess you probably didn't travel much to St. John or Fredericton as
I did, but I didn't have the impression there were a lot of black people. I don't remember seeing a lot of black people in St. John.
There probably, I don't know how many there were, but again, because the land they were given was primarily very rural and out in the country, if you were in the city, you might not have seen them. Even to this date, I don't believe that New Brunswick's entire black population makes up more than 3% of the province. It might be even less. So while they certainly were there, it could explain why the trips that you took, you didn't encounter them.
Yeah, because my sister told me last week, well, she's now 64, and I didn't know this, but she said the first time she saw, is it correct to say a person of color?
That's
Person
not
of color, she was 20. That was at the University of Moncton. That's the first time she saw a person of color. She was 20,
I was just gonna say, I know that my mom's actually 73,
Yeah.
and I know that my mom, I always ask because of my mom growing up in Reverend Cook and being white, like how did you end up with a mixed race daughter, and what did your parents think of all of this? And in all honesty, she said that she had black neighbors when she would have been about 7 or 8 in downtown Moncton, and she just always felt like, well, that's the black girl across the street, and it's just another friend. And my grandparents never said anything, thank goodness.
Yeah.
But there were some, but from a historical standpoint, I don't know numbers.
Yeah.
And of course, I think, we're talking about St. John and the fact that there were a lot, but again, in ratio and in comparison to Moncton where there were few, I don't know if we're talking thousands. Because I mean, even when we're going to get into this, the population of New Brunswick right now has grown so much because of immigration that at the time then, I would assume our population was not a lot.
Yes, that's
So-
right, yeah.
Yeah, so we are going to get into that, sort of jumping ahead to more current times. But yeah, the black population in Moncton really only started with the French University, UDM, and those black people, they were mostly West African, which is a primarily French-speaking countries of Africa. And because New Brunswick is officially a bilingual province, and because there are not many French universities in Canada, that did sort of become a hotspot for West Africans. Even when, and I don't know what year they started coming, but even when West Africans started going to the university in Moncton, they certainly did not feel comfortable intermingling with the city. They typically did tend to stay on campus for the most of their university experience and then go back. As you see nowadays, there has been quite a change. There has been quite a change in immigration. There have been people from many countries and cultures coming to New Brunswick. And even the university students definitely feel much more comfortable intermingling with the city. So what you're saying makes sense. We are speaking mostly about St. John and Fredericton. There isn't really a historical footprint of black people in Moncton. Again, the term black is a blanket statement that just seems to encompass visible minorities with a certain tone of dark skin. But the reality is black people could be from any of the 54 countries in Africa. They could be from America. They could be from the Caribbean. They could be from other places in Canada. And that does tend to make up a lot of the black population that you see here in Moncton specifically.
Hillary.
When we arrived in Moncton in the early 80s, I remember there was two families, but the father was from Haiti.
That makes sense. Haiti being a French-speaking country. My parents moved to New Brunswick in 1999, and I didn't myself come here until about 2009. I grew up in Toronto, and when I came out here, same thing. New Brunswick has basically, I think this is the right word, always been a homogenous culture, primarily Anglo-Saxon, of course with the Acadians as well, and sorry, let me please take that back. Not
I was just going to
primarily
say, whoa.
Anglo-Saxon.
We're going to get into the
Primarily European, yeah, we are getting into that more. Primarily European, without many other cultures until recently. Please, I apologize. I said I might be using the wrong term. Yeah, not Anglo-Saxon, but European.
Yeah.
And
yeah, because as we're going to discuss, it's very much Anglo-Saxon versus Roman Catholic at certain points, and against the Acadian community, and I'll be talking about my good Acadians in a minute.
Yeah.
And having only love for them.
just in the interest of time, again, so amidst all these challenges, and this could be easily searched on the New Brunswick Historical Society's website, where they have great presentations on this. There were many notable black people that arose from these challenging things. The first black lawyer in Canada was Abraham Beverly Walker. There were many business owners. There's even movie producers from the early 1900s that came from New Brunswick and found their way to Hollywood.
Wiley
O'Ree, and many others. So we're not going to talk about all the big Black people have always been here. They continue to be here. Whether it be the ancient people from hundreds of years ago, or the many people that have come into the province since, along with many other cultures. But that is a little bit, or that is a presentation on Black communities in Moncton, first part. I've really enjoyed the questions that you're all asking. Does anyone have any questions?
I have to, like, because, okay, my neighbor, she just moved into a nursing home, and she's in her 90s, and most of the persons who look after her are Black, okay? Now see there, I said Black, and I want to say, like, person of color, okay? So when she says, because Ayakadien,
Oui.
elle a dit, she says, ah ben les nègres, c'est un autre nègre qui vient. Je dis,
That's wrong.
je dis, non, je dis pas, c'est pas ça, tu dis pas ça, tu dis noir.
Oui.
Is
Yeah.
one better than the other?
Absolutely, because we've had this conversation before because on our podcast we did have a guest, Lynn Douay, who is also mixed race like me, biracial, but she actually grew up in the French school system. And she experienced actually teachers and students who would say nègre, but to her and to me it is a direct translation of the N-word. It is not a synonymous for Black or noir. It is two different things. I think we try very hard to educate people that, like, saying Black isn't a bad word.
No.
I know that we sort of discussed on the fact that, like, it might not be a real term, but I think that person of color to me is very much an umbrella for someone who's racialized and you can't tell. And that's okay because we are starting to all mix and be
Yeah, because it's
so
more
many.
inclusive, right?
Of course, it is.
Person of color is like more inclusive.
It's definitely more inclusive in terms of not knowing and not wanting to specify, but I've had experiences working here in Moncton where someone said something to a supervisor about me, and they said, oh, that Black cashier, and the staff there was like beside themselves that I was being called the Black cashier, and I'm like, what else is the easiest way to pinpoint me in a staff to 20 other white girls working? So to me it's not harmful. I would say that nègre is.
So what do I tell her then?
I would say that saying noir is fine.
Okay.
Say les personnes qui sont noires qui travaillent là.
Okay.
That's what I would say. And
Une personne
racialisée, I think, also works. Because that just means racialized, and it can be anything. And I do commiserate. I don't think that directly translates. I will say my mom actually is also in a nursing home, and it is very interesting that I've had a lot of conversations about how it's nice that certain people of a certain age are trying very hard to say the right things and do the right things. So yes, I appreciate you trying to educate. Thank you.
If I can just add before you ask your question. Yeah, I understand, just like I was saying with whether we call them Black loyalists, Black settlers, Black arrivees, it can be confusing as language changes and evolves. I would also agree that using the term Black person is perfectly fine. However, when someone says terms like the Blacks or that Black person, to me, I don't know, for some reason it just does feel wrong. Person of color, it's descriptive and it's accurate, and that's fine as well. Although I've actually read a report just in the past week or two that most people of color don't use the term people of color. It's all, well, that's what the government officially sort of adapted as the term BIPOC, Black Indigenous people of color. To me, Black is actually fine. Regardless of what I said in the beginning, I believe we're all part of just this spectrum. Black is fine. I think personally, visible minority is probably one of the most accurate and fitting terms for me, because we are in a place where there is a majority of a culture, and then visibly, it's very obvious that there are other groups of people that are the minority. But Black is fine. Obviously, the word that was used in French is not. But I have during the pandemic, I had friends and I met people that moved here, and many Black people that entered into health services because the New Brunswick government, I believe, was paying for their education. And I'm sad to say, especially with the shortage of doctors and nurses that we have right now, but that many of them got right back out of it because of the terminology that they were being referred to.
Well, I actually, personally, I find that having this discussion, I don't like using like those were like blacks or person, like why not just like use a person's name like
Or you could
That would be
describe
ideal.
the person with the curly hair, or the person with their name.
or just kind
Yes.
of, yeah.
And
The person with the tan.
Really?
The person with the tan.
the person with the tan, that is, I say that one a lot as a joke.
I get quite light in the winter, I'll tell you. I get quite light in the winter and quite dark in the summer.
And I'll
I
add,
guess just because of the very last thing I'll say. Obviously, there is a degree of sensitivity regarding how to describe people, just due to the history of people that are not you or me, the people, things that were done in this country before us, that makes it a sensitive topic. So I understand why.
Yeah.
And
all I was going to add is that I think the big thing in terms of semantics is making sure that there's that element that makes the person feel like a person. The problem with saying those blacks is that you've lost the person in all of that. But if you say those black people at the mall, at least they still have a sense of humanity in the description. And that's the main thing that I think most activists just don't want to get lost in language. I don't care if you were to say those black people, those people of color, but people is still part of the conversation, and you don't lose sight, and you're not just describing color. That's the main thing I've read in articles, but again...
no, you're right. And like all groups of people, people with skin color like ours aren't necessarily going to agree on the proper term to call us, because we're allowed to all have different opinions and viewpoints and ideas of what is acceptable or not.
Yeah, we even don't agree all the time.
That's okay. That's okay, because we're humans.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you for your
If there
patience.
were a few people of color when I was young,
Yes.
one has to go to the University of Moncton, and you'd think you're in an African university.
Absolutely.
That's correct. Yeah.
When I meet black people at the university, one question that I do ask them, do you experience racism?
Mhm.
And we have a whole lot of Indians in Moncton too, and I'm not talking about indigenous people.
I understand.
I'm talking about, we don't know now if we have to use the term or not.
You're not...
They're Indians. They're
Yes.
They're
really
from India, they're Indians.
Absolutely.
And they have a tendency to tell me that they have not experienced a lot of racism. And my question to you, where you were born with an Acadian mother,
Yes.
and in a Acadian community,
Yeah.
did you experience a lot of racism, except the example you gave about?
Yeah, so I think I've almost started every article with the fact that I was called the N-word at the age of 2. My mom was taking me to get my potty training underwear to Highfield Square when Highfield Square existed, and the skinhead said, "Look at the N-word baby," and my mom told me that as like a sign of people are going to say this about you. You're a child, you have no personality, you've done nothing wrong but exist in your skin color, and people won't like you. In the 10th grade, I was pushed into a wall called the cotton picker. I've experienced a range of things. I would say that they all sort of harken back to just a lack of education and ignorance. They've never bothered me because it has nothing to do with me as a person. It has everything to do with something superficial that someone has a bad opinion about. In terms of Acadian specific community, I wouldn't say that I've necessarily experienced anything from anyone I could say is like Kenya. It's been other white people, but we're founded in New Brunswick, but I've actually been living in Toronto for 6 years, and I was called the N-word in Ottawa, I was called it in Toronto, so it does not know the parameters of New Brunswick. Racism knows no bounds, unfortunately, but also there's so many people who want to be educated when we do this work. A lot of the people that we interview, I went to UW as well, and a lot of the people that we speak to who are black who come from away, their big thing is that they didn't know they were black until they came to a white community and were told that they were black. When you live in South Sudan, you are one of many people who look like you, and it takes coming here and being put into a place of minority to have this realization and feel these icky feelings inside of you that you're not good enough because of your skin color. I agree with the description that I gave to Em. There was a lot of people of color, and I felt weird because I was half white. I did not feel like I belonged. I felt like my French wasn't good enough, and I felt like I didn't know racism as good as they knew racism because they didn't have that 50% chance of hope that someone might look at them and see the Le Blanc or the Melançon and like them. they have names like Ibrahim Asso, my father, and you're written off from a job, from a loan, from anything because you're from Senegal. So I didn't feel like I could relate to them either because I knew mountain racism. I didn't know racism on a grand scale. So it's a weird, going back to we're not monoliths, it's a weird experience. And I didn't feel like I fit in at UDM, but I tried and I graduated. So yeah.
Yeah, because my sister moved to Montreal 40 years ago, and she married, well, he's Greek, and her daughter, like let's say her husband's best friends were Jewish, okay, my sister's husband was born in Egypt, and then they came to, okay, but now when my sister, because my sister was racist when she went to Montreal, because she found herself like being amongst more diversified people, and whenever she would mention let's say something about a person of color, like black, she would sometimes say, use the N-word, right? And my niece would get so upset because my niece, had more connections with, she grew up with international children, from everywhere, so she would get really upset with my sister because, so it's so alive. It's so alive, moving. It's so, it's
super fluid.
It's not stagnant,
Yeah, I noticed. So you get a question, right?
Yeah, no, it's just a comment because you said earlier les personnes racialisées.
Oui.
So it includes everybody. It doesn't make any difference. And we're trying to stay away from that terminology of races.
Right.
So I think visible minority.
Right. But I think to say,
person of color is better than, in my opinion.
Sure. I would say that to say that someone's racialized can be synonymous with a visible minority, because at the end of the day, we're unfortunately describing someone based on what makes them different, and that is, to your point, using names would just be so much more effective and would steer away from that at all. But of course, there is that similarity in the words racism that I said you say, of course, but it's very complicated.
And if I understood what you were saying, I think that being racialized is a term where someone is identified because of this conception of their race. But I've argued before that, I don't like the term racist because to me it implies that we are not all part of the same human race. So we are obviously different. We're from different places in the world. And through generations, regardless of what you believe, whether we've been here for 6,000 years or millions of years, through generations of being in different parts of the world, we've developed different features, maybe different skin tones, noses, body types, possibly culture, opinions, likes, foods, and musics. And so while I use the term racist sometimes, just because of default, I don't like it because it implies that we are not part of the same human species. And in some ways, I feel that can divide us a bit more. It sounded like you were saying you like the term visible minority. Better than
personne racialisée.
In the research, do we know about mixed marriage with the black people on these settlements? Yes.
I don't. I know that my mother, who was born and raised in PEI, she went to Jamaica when she was 21 and worked in the same orphanage as my father. And they got married when sparks flew, and they got married 8 years later. I know that they were married in Jamaica before the civil rights movement even took place in the States. And she was fully accepted down there in Jamaica. They were fine. They came back to Toronto. They claimed they had a pretty normal life. But when my dad would go to PEI, he was very well accepted. But I don't have any information whatsoever regarding
Well, we're going to talk about.
marriages.
We are going to talk about an interesting, one specific situation within intermixed, I guess, marriage that the KKK obviously did not like. But we don't have any statistics on percentages. But obviously, we're both biracial, so we're part of those statistics.
That's sort of the joke we often make. So what is Hillary and what am I? If there are black people and white people, are we great?
But you say biracial, but actually there is no such a thing
I
as
don't like
a
that.
race.
I don't use that term anymore.
That's
It's intercultural.
Yeah,
So I have my own philosophies on this.
it's
I try to
an
get out there.
unscientific appellation.
I don't use biracial, I don't use interracial, I say I'm intercultural. Intercultural. Because again, there's no denying that cultures are different. I don't think that's a reason to hate. But yeah, cultures around the world are very different.
From what I heard, I think you identify to a certain extent with the Acadians.
Yes.
Do you have a problem of identity, having a mother that is PEI and a father from West Indies?
Yeah, I would say I spent my entire life struggling with the question of who am I and what am I. Even growing up in Toronto, incredibly multicultural neighborhood, probably kids from 40 different cultures at my school. And while nowadays you see intercultural children, specifically from black and white cultures all over the place, even growing up in a city as diverse as Toronto, I never saw anyone that looked like me. It wasn't until high school that I met other people that had black and white parents. And my brothers and my sister as well. Am I black? Am I white? You know, what I settled on for most of my life is that I was Canadian, or that I was a person. I have to acknowledge, though, that regardless of how I identify, or even if I have to identify, I certainly grew up living the life through the lens of being seen as black by everyone around me. And that probably did shape my experiences. Hillary and I have talked about this a lot, that happens with intercultural kids. You know, the saying, like, you know, we're not black enough for the black people and not white enough for the white people. We're black to the white people and we're white to the black people. Tanya, do you?
We all sound familiar.
Okay. While we feel we are seen as black and we have darker skin, I mean, there's a unique set of challenges that arise from intercultural children growing up in this country as well.
One last comment before we go to the next.
Yes. We finally get to the KKK part.
I'm a school teacher,
Okay.
retired as you can see, and when I taught school, mostly in grade 9, we had a book called Les Maritimes Trois Provinces à Découvrir. Do you remember having that book?
No, should I know?
No, you wouldn't know, but I
You would.
Is this a teacher?
This is my favorite teacher. This is
a teacher.
There were 30 pages on Acadian history. That was the first time in my life and in the life of my kids that they were learning about their history in school. There were 30 pages about Irish and Scottish. There were 30 pages about the indigenous people. And I was very happy to teach that because we did not have too much history at all in that sense. And if I had anything about black communities in New Brunswick, with 30 pages, it would have been fantastic.
Of course. Well, you will soon, thankfully. But thank
I was
you.
going to say, so our problem is now in the New Brunswick education system that is still not in our social studies curriculum and still not in our books and still not being taught to our
So
students.
we'll get into it, but as you know,
Yes.
we have made the curriculum. I think it's being reviewed. We're adding some, there's being books made, resources.
Numerous new books have been implemented.
Yes, so there will be one, many years too late, but there will be one. So we're happy that there will be a Black History
In
Week.
2017, it was the 150th anniversary of Canadian Confederation. He produced a movie called The History of Us. And the history of us, there was never mentioned of all the groups we'll be talking here today, the French, First Nations and Black people. And so we sent a letter to the Department of Education saying that there is something abnormal, that there's no mention, the history of Canadian is not, does not begin by the English settlement. We should have a common history in the curriculum. And we received a letter telling us continue your good work.
A similar thing happened in a museum that I won't say where, but I was hired to consult on what they were doing sort of about the Confederation and the coming to Canada of its existence. And in the lineup, they have Indigenous voices telling the story, but they start at colonization, and they have the Indigenous voice thank the British for coming to Canada, and then they go to the Acadians. They skip like black people and go to like LGBTQ to then go to BLM. So they skip slavery to go to the queer community, then highlight the resurgence of Black Lives Matters movement, but they forgot to say that Indigenous people were here at the start. And so I had to be like, excuse me, please no. So it wasn't good. So I'm going to be spearheading the part about the KKK. As I sort of mentioned, there were about 300 letters that were scanned that I was able to read and reread for various articles. So that's why we sort of divided out this talk the way that we did. I'm going to touch a little bit loosely on the history of the KKK. So they were founded in 1865, and they extended into almost every southern state by 1870, and they became a vehicle for white southern resistance for the Republican Party's Reconstruction-era policies. And they were aimed at establishing political and economic equality. Its members waged an underground campaign of intimidation and violence directed at white and black Republican leaders. After a period of decline, white Protestant and nativist groups revived the Klan in the early 20th century, burning crosses, staging rallies, parades, and marches, denouncing immigrants, Catholics, Jews, African Americans, and organized labor. The civil rights movement of the 1960s also saw a surge of the Ku Klux Klan activity, including bombings of black schools and churches and violence against black and white activists in Southern America. But to get into the history that I know about the KKK's presence in New Brunswick, the letters that I was able to read, they started in 1925 and they run until 1940. And I do want to note that the letters start 91 years after slavery had been abolished, as we've already discussed. What I found interesting in the letters, and again, you can reach out to access them, and I'll show some screenshots of some of them. Did you actually print the letters? Yes. Thank you. Well, we'll see if you have a couple. If not, I'll pull them up. But what I found very interesting in the letters is that there's some that are actually women of the husbands that are members of the KKK asking how they can be involved. So one of the letters.
I can on the switch.
I know I have it on here.
On the slideshow, but I can pull them up on here and put them on the screen.
Sure, I'll move over.
Disconnect this for a minute.
No worries, I'll pull it up so I can read it here. So one of the letters that he's going to pull up says, I have your address from a Miss Catherine Morrison. She informs me that there is a possibility of the Klan forming a women's branch in New Brunswick in the near future. Sister Morrison wishes me to join up and thinks I may be of some help. When this is arranged, so it is not a money grab for a select few. I will be glad to go in on the ground floor at the beginning in New Brunswick. So as I said, there were women who actually wanted to try to join to support their husbands. There are a few letters as well, and I will get more into this, that they don't. None of the letters directly name black people as a target. They actually name Acadians as the problem. This was my favorite part to tell my folks. So, plot twist. This talk is actually about Acadians. So, the KKK often, being Anglo-Saxon Puritan, actually discuss hating Acadian Roman Catholics, as there was at the time there was 137,000 in the province, and so that they could unify and actually be a threat to what the English Protestants were trying to accomplish. There's also a few letters that, can you show? This is the letter in which Catherine Morrison is asking to join the women's branch. So that's this letter. And then there's a few letters as well that ask for more patriotism. They ask that the Canadian flag be flown more at schools and the Canadian anthem be sung more to encourage more patriotism across the board. Did anyone have a question?
Was it a very secret, was it as secret as the Orange Lodge, which really targeted Catholics and French?
Yeah, so these letters are, I have, I think, a screenshot as well of the letters that show meeting at the Orange Lodge. It is very much that secretive. However, I am going to get into an instance, yes. All New Brunswick members are invited to meet at the Orange Lodge on Germain Street, I believe, Fredericton, and to hear a lecture by the Imperial Clig Rap by order of C. Lewis Fowler. I'm going to get into this man in a minute, but I do want to touch on some of the language. So what I find interesting and maybe almost humorous is obviously being the KKK. Canada is spelled with a K. They refer to each other as Kleagles as an officer. Being a Clig Rap meant that you were somehow superior. They met in claverns. They were clansmen, and they dealt not in dollars, but in Klek tokens. So they had their own form of currency. They were their own little unit. And they signed every letter that's handwritten with an acronym that read in the sacred unfailing being, which is from it's from the Bible, because all of this is supposed to be about God.
Also, Imperial Clig Rap, it means KKK?
That is like a title within the rankings.
Oh, I see.
It is, yes.
Did they establish collaborations with the Freemason?
I didn't see any of that in any documentation.
Because also they were against Catholic and...
Yes.
There's definitely relationships with the KKK branches in Toronto and Montreal. I'm sorry.
No.
Maybe mention that? Yeah, so in Maine, Boston, they invited them, they partnered, Toronto, Montreal, even out to Vancouver, but I don't know about Freemasons.
C. Lewis Fowler, it's a bit of an interesting case. So this man, as you can see, has signed this letter and was very, very impassioned about the movement of the KKK, to the point of, if you can show another one of the photos. I'll stop here. So here's the ITSUB in the sacred unfailing being. So that's the religious signing of the letters, and it does say at the bottom here Clig Rap as well. And
the secret of... in the secret of what?
In the sacred unfailing being.
Unfailing being.
Yes. And then I also wanted to point out in this that they're talking about 6 or 7 cars of people that are candidates to join the KKK that they're going to naturalize. So the process of turning people into a good Anglo-Saxon Protestant was referred to as like naturalizing, to signify purifying them of maybe whatever sins they had done and being a good KKK standing to join up the force. But I'm looking for a different document, the orange one.
The book?
Yes. So C. Lewis Fowler actually wrote a book about the KKK. He was so passionate about it that this man from New Brunswick wrote a book about why it is important to be a part of the KKK. This brochure is affectionately dedicated to the 10 lost tribes of the House of Israel, who by the grace of God and in accordance with his divine plan are no longer lost, but have in these last days been revealed for humanity's final conflict. The long and illustrious line of real patriots who are rendering their last full measure of faithful service to the hour, and to my brethren in the Protestant ministry today, with the hope and prayer that it may lift them out of the ecclesi... No, I can't even say this word. Can you say that word?
Ecclesiastical.
Thank you. And desolate wilderness into which many have unconsciously fallen, and into new fields of thought. and understanding, and therefore to a new message that will burn and glow to the glory of God and the everlasting good of all peoples. It also over here says, woe is me if I fail to give expression to the truth revealed to me, for which humanity is calling. I claim to know as much about the Ku Klux Klan movement as any other living man. And so this is sort of his reasons to write patriotic Protestantism or Protestant patriotism. And I think there's another screenshot as well.
Back to
This one. Yeah, so in this one, the original tribute, he says, the author of this brochure wishes to pay a richly deserved tribute to the immortals who were responsible for the KKK upon the North American continent. General Nathan Bedford Forrest, whose hand reached forth and received it from Scotland and used it in one of the grandest and most noble achievements in Anglo-Saxon history. And ends it with, history will richly adorn the brow of each of these with garlands of praise and appreciation. I place mine now. The world ultimately follows its wise men, its prophets and seers. It likewise ultimately repudiates and hates its ambitious and self-seeking Napoleons. General Forrest and Colonel Simon were wise men. So all of this book is to say, good job, the KKK, join us, and reasons why they should exist. Funnily enough, this actually broke several policies and oaths because you are not allowed to publicly say that you were part of the KKK, and C. Lewis Fowler, once Imperial Calligraph, got banned from being a member of the KKK because he wrote a book about why it's cool to be a member of the KKK, and it's sort of my favorite part of the whole story. But he was so impassioned that, and there's several letters in which they say there could have been some financial issues as well, that he was withholding money, that he was too in love with the cause and talked about it way too much and therefore got banned. If you can go back to the slideshow.
What are the dates again?
So this is between 1925 and 1940. I believe it's early on in the letters.
And the meeting was in 1927. I remember
Yeah.
the call for the meeting was, I think,
It's very grandiose. Delusional. Huh?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And again, like we're presenting this as Black people, but this entire book is about being Protestant and not being okay with Roman Catholics or the Acadians, the Québécois, les francophones. It was not about skin tone. It was about religion. It was about religion.
It goes to say that I think it would be dirty without doubt that they weren't very friendly to the Black folk in New Brunswick at the time either.
Absolutely. And then, so I also want to touch on this. There's actually a paper about all of this by Tyler Klein. It's called A Clarion Call to Real Patriots the World Over, the Curious Case of the KKK of Canada in New Brunswick in the 1920s and the 1930s. And it actually highlights the fact that this was a fight between the Acadians and the Protestants. It says that the KKK movement in New Brunswick in the 20s and the 30s was part of a wave of anti-Catholicism in the Northeast. The supposedly American organization's connections with local Protestants, such as the Orange Order and conservative politicians, coupled with New Brunswick's long history of anti-Catholicism, indicate that the Klan's nativism was not foreign to the province. Instead, it was part of a religion-wide response to a thriving Catholic population that challenged the Protestant Anglophone milieu. The Klan's transnational Protestantism rejected bilingualism and Catholic participation in the political sphere while promoting traditional Anglo-Saxon views and Protestant morality. The arrival of KKK in Canada was first reported in 1922. Francophone Catholics, including descendants and migrants from Quebec and the Métis, presented a challenge to Anglophone cultural hegemony. And that the KKK in New Brunswick was formed in this environment of discontent and conspiratorial fear. The rise of politically active and socially vibrant Acadian communities in the early 20th century fanned the fears of nativists in the province. The Acadian population at the time was 137,000 in 1931, and it had been ignored and denigrated by the Anglophone population and traditionally economically marginalized from the rest of New Brunswick. So this entire paper is actually about how the KKK was fighting these Acadians and not Black people. I also want to bring up that a lot of the letters discuss there was 12 communities in New Brunswick that had KKK chapters. There's Fredericton, Quebec, Plaster Rock, Moncton, Sussex, the list goes on and on. And they were often in contact with headquarters in Vancouver and in Toronto. And in my research, and going back to the question about mixed marriages, there was a case that is referenced in a letter in New Brunswick about the Oakville Affair. And the Oakville Affair happened on February 28, 1930. 75 members of the KKK in Oakville, Ontario set a cross on fire where a Black World War I veteran, Ira Junius Johnson, and his white girlfriend, Isabel Jones, were visiting. They were visiting the Black veteran's aunt. They took the white girlfriend from their house, returned her to her mother's home, and then they brought the World War I veteran to his house at the end of the street and made him watch the burning cross on his lawn and told him if he was ever seen walking with a white woman again, he would be dealt with. The shocking part is this is the first time in Canada that a member of the Klan was persecuted in court for this act. It's worth noting that the mayor of Oakville actually said, "Personally, I think the Ku Klux Klan acted quite properly in the matter. The feeling in the town is generally against such a marriage. It will be quite an object lesson." This couple actually ended up getting married a month later, and they had 2 kids. So they won. They ended up winning and getting to be married together. But that is the story of the Oakville Affair. Summarizing all of this and all of the letters, what we found in a lot of our research and work is that obviously they never went away. While the letters stopped at 1940, a lot of us in the room have experienced racism, and we know that the KKK still actively exists. There was an article in 2021 by the CBC that highlighted a resurgence of hate groups. They believe in part with Donald Trump's presidency in America. David Hoffman, who was an associate professor of sociology at UNB, said that in the past 5 years, the number of active extremist groups in Atlantic Canada had surged from 8 groups with 4 or 5 members in 2015 to 30 groups with 150 members by 2020. It also, I think that actually this is the document.
Excuse me, you said in New Brunswick or in the time?
Atlantic Canada.
Atlantic Canada.
So in Atlantic Canada, in 2020, there were 30 hate groups. And in this article, it does highlight as well that there had been, I believe in 2017, the KKK was canvassing and actually asking for members to join in New Brunswick. So the professor answers a lot of great questions about why do people want to join an extreme group? How did they come? Where did they come from? And it was right there where it said the part about 2017, but that's Professor Hoffman.
2017.
Keep going down. Right here. Ku Klux Klan has also had a presence in New Brunswick since the 1920s, but was actively attempting to recruit as recently as 2017 in Fredericton. So that's only 6 years ago, and I can't imagine that they've, been eradicated. You can go back to
Back to the slideshow?
Yes, please. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Yeah, I think also, I don't remember which year, but around these years,
Yes.
it was active in Toronto, if I remember reading in
I'm sure.
a newspaper. I think the KKK was active in Toronto.
I would definitely assume so. I only moved there in 2017, and then I educated myself about New Brunswick, but I'm sure that they were. Yes.
Did they go after the black community?
I would assume
Well-
so. Oh, yes, you have the story in 2001?
Yes, so to answer that question, I'm not sure if you've all heard about this, and this does also relate to our discussion about skinheads in Riverview through the 80s and 90s, and in fact, as I've been here 14 years now, my parents have been here for 24 years, my sister at 14 had no choice but to move to Riverview, New Brunswick, in which she was regularly harassed and called the N-word at Riverview High School. I know other people who have been attacked. There was only 1 or 2 black families in Riverview at the time. And as I met people from other places in New Brunswick, it was commonly known among black communities that if anyone was going to go to Moncton to move or visit or live, they would always be warned, watch out for the skinheads, be careful of the skinheads. Now, as Hillary said, you know, there was the KKK in the 20s who, it was more about anti-Catholicism, but of course they did not want, they wanted Brunswick to be completely Anglo-Saxon.
And pure.
And, you know, even with the skinheads, I'm sure some of them possibly grew up and changed their viewpoints, but what really probably happened is they just grew out their hair, and they're likely still here.
Yes.
So I'm not sure if you folks have heard about this story from Moncton in August 24th of 2001. It happened in July, but a man pleads guilty to New Brunswick cross burning. An 18-year-old has pleaded guilty in connection with the cross burning on the front lawn of a black family's home in Moncton last month. So it's just one article, and I'm sure even in the States they do mostly live in silence. You did mention that they were not allowed to even, you said they're not allowed to acknowledge that they're part of the KKK, they're secretive. So this person messed up. But this is a sign that they are still here and around. Yeah, it's fine. So again, it's not a joke, but we make the joke that they grew out their hair and they're not like harassing people on the streets anymore, but they're wearing suits and ties and working in offices and government jobs and such like that.
It sounds a lot like the base that is KKK, Trump.
Oh, the ones that are helping?
Yeah.
Yes,
Trump's base.
absolutely.
But
Well,
Actually, Trump's father, Donald Trump's father was very active with the KKK.
so there was evidence that showed that the KKK was one of many groups that funded some of his work, and like he gave money to his party, and a lot of black people at the time, before we saw the destruction that his presidency caused, a lot of black people asked, like, you're not racist, why are you accepting money from a racist group of people? And then everything sort of unfolded the way that it did. But I remember the night that he won, that a KKK group in North Carolina went and burned crosses the night that he was first elected. And shortly after, we had people wearing the Make America Great Again hats in Alberta, in Toronto. And so I've pulled out this article because it's discussing New Brunswick, but Donald Trump ended up causing a resurgence in the ability to be loud about your racism globally. And across this country from coast to coast, be it Alberta or here in New Brunswick.
Yeah, it's not that the people weren't still here, didn't still have the same viewpoints. But Donald Trump, and I'm sure he radicalized and changed some minds, but he just really gave the folks that felt that way a platform to be more confident about being vocal and proclaiming their views to the world.
Absolutely.
Where they probably felt silenced for 8 years under Obama, and this was the opportunity they were waiting for.
And it's only occurring to me now, but of course there is the Proud Boys are almost a brother organization to the KKK that also go around and have neo-Nazi mentalities, also rally and try to terrorize groups of people as well. When I wrote an article about the history of the KKK in New Brunswick, I did add facts about the Proud Boys, and I tried to focus on the KKK for this talk, but very similar goals and mindset that we should be white and pure and any other color races.
With a mob mentality.
White and pure English.
Yes, exactly.
Well, yes, okay, you mentioned there a while ago about the women joining, right?
Yes.
Well, I remember my mother saying something about, I think it was the Second World War, that, what was that about, like that women would shave their heads or something if they were seen, like, that was something they had to do, like, to identify who they belonged to, or like to protect themselves, like, what was that? Did that have to do with the KKK, or?
I wouldn't have thought. I'm not sure.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
The literature is very religious. God and
Yes.
are they really good people? Are they really religious people, or are they hiding in back of religion?
I can't speak for the KKK, and not to make any comments on religion, but I do believe throughout history we've seen many examples of people hiding behind religion as an excuse to carry out their horrific viewpoints and mentalities, justifying it as being ordained by God or the will of God. So I don't know. I would say some of them believe what they're saying, and I believe some of them, no, they're not religious at all. And if they were following, I guess, the words of the Bible, although we won't get into that, no, I haven't seen anywhere in the Bible that would encourage that kind of behavior of wanting to eradicate a certain culture. Of course, they talk about chosen peoples and stuff like that. There is references in the Bible that support slavery and the mistreatment of women. That's for sure.
St. Paul's epistles.
Right.
There is a lot of history of the use of religion for war, for power, for dictature. And if you look at Iran, this is they hide. There's a group of old people with a lot of money who control a lot of money, and they impose extreme laws. And then you have the Inquisition. It's another, and les aventures militaires au Moyen-Orient sous Charlemagne, les croisades. It was the same thing everywhere. Religion is toxic. Is it?
It's one of those things where I think that people either sincerely think that they're doing good under the mask of a cause and then proceed to do a bunch of malicious things, but my personal opinion is you have to have that type of evil in your heart. You can't pick up any book and read a mission and then decide you're going to naturalize, commit genocide, kill a group of people just because of something that you read in a book. I think that you have to have that ill intent in you. My dad's Muslim, my mom's Catholic. I've got a Quran, I've got a Bible, no one's ever told me to hurt anybody. So I don't think that that's the mission of anything. If you want to, I'll fix that if you want to. The next slide is more of the screenshots and photos of the letters.
Absolutely, and then I've also found some of the references to slavery in news articles and in the bill of sale. Again, the purpose is not to speak about religion or religious people, but just to finish off, my personal belief is that I wouldn't imagine that the majority of the people who lead the groups that carry out these atrocities in the name of God truly believe in God himself.
Yeah, my question is the letter about the woman wanted to join the PTT or a section. Do you know if there was a section of women? Do you know if it went on and finally they were able to form a section?
From my understanding, it stayed a men's club.
Okay.
All of the letters for the rest of the 15 years never discuss women again. Other than there's letters about an all-girls orphanage that I think burns down, and they use KKK funding to save the orphanage and rebuild it. It's the only other time that they mention women. Yeah. That's the cover of C. Lewis Fowler's book that got him kicked out of the Klan, and that is an official. So this one is credentials that actually make somebody a member of the KKK, and it's for a gentleman in Sussex, New Brunswick, and it has all the language about, the Kleagle of the Invisible Empire, Knights of the Ku Klux Klan of Canada, December 31st, 1927, and it gives the rules about what they're authorized to do, not authorized to do, and the three people who signed it. and then there's another page.
Do you want me to?
Keep going.
Do you want me to jump to the
Yeah, you
slave thing and go back to that so you can set that up? So you
can. No, you can go ahead. The next page. So that's more. Those are more letters that just talk. This is a letter with the headquarters out in Toronto, and then that's it. That one I put in there is just an excerpt of some of the Constitution and the laws that they had to follow as members of the Klan. But in the letters that we had, there are like pages of oaths that they had to take and read to say that they were never going to talk about the Klan, that they would never intermingle with people that they weren't supposed to. Like, you weren't allowed to fall in love with a Catholic Acadian. That goes against the oath. So there's pages of those as well, but I just wanted to give a snapshot of some of what was in there.
Actually, they have to the lovers of law and order, peace, and justice.
Yes, you send greetings. Hello.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so that's the kind of double speak, right? That just overshadows that either they're so delusional.
Like, I wonder where this felt like they get even the, Ku Klan, like, okay, Klan, I know it's like tribal, Klux, what's Ku Klux, like?
It has to be, well, from what C. Lewis Fowler is saying in those first pages of the book, this is an organization that came from Scotland to America, and then it was like, then it spread as far as Canada. So I don't know if it's somehow a Scottish language, something that they made up in America.
So it could be like a dialect, like Scottish dialect.
It very well could be. I don't know the etymology of the name, but it definitely, that was the name that started back in 1862, and then it just spread, and now it's the horrible acronym we all know.
What's the logo like? What did they draw there, up there in the left?
So the left is honor with a flag, and it's horses holding their version of a British flag. There's a crown and it says loyalty. Okay. This side is KAA with an I in the center, and it looks sort of like a sloth at the top. Like, it does not look like a lion or a tiger. It looks like a lemur. A beaver? Maybe a beaver.
Yeah, it looks like a beaver.
Yeah, and it says that this is for the Eastern Regional Headquarters.
Canadian, maybe.
It says Toronto here, and then this is the Vancouver one. And
right.
Honor, loyalty.
Yeah, right. So the beaver could be
probably.
Canadian.
That makes sense. Thank you.
And
you can keep going.
I wonder if they're associated with the Masonic. Like, is orange and Masonic the same?
Well, so that was the question about Freemasonry. Freemasonry is the Masonic Temple, right? So it would, they must have.
Yeah, okay.
And then these are the articles that I already read out loud. So the left is Tyler Klein's article about the KKK being against les Acadiens. And then the CBC article that we just pulled up with the statistics about what's going on only just as recent as 2 years ago. Yeah. There. Did you want to talk about the current racial climate?
Yeah, and just before that, I mentioned that we just, for your eyes to see, that from the provincial archives, again, Hillary mentioned we can send 19 pages with links for information that we can comb through over time. But this is a real document. This is a real document. It's a bill of sale for a slave here in New Brunswick. So the writing is a bit different, but this indenture witnesseth that for and in confirmation or confederation of the sum of 15 pounds New Brunswick currency in hand placed, hand in hand do I hereby bargain, fell, and deliver unto my something John, a Negro boy named...
My son John.
Unto my son John, a Negro boy named Felipe, I believe, to be his property and his heirs of the said Negro, goes on and on. Hereby I acknowledge acknowledge that this said George Harding was warned to pay property against all claims, witnesses, dated this 18th of July in the year of our Lord, 1797. So this is a receipt. This is a receipt for the purchase of a human being here in New Brunswick from 1797. Stamped with a wax seal, I imagine. And yeah, it's we came across this a couple years ago. You know, to anyone who would like to deny that slavery took place in Canada, that humans were sold, that this was only an American problem, and that us Canadians, I'm Canadian, Hillary's a Canadian, that us Canadians were only the saviors of black people through the Underground Railroad, and we were the beacon of light compared to our evil, our bad big brother down south. It's not true. It's not true. Well, there wasn't a cotton industry due to weather, and probably that's it. So it didn't thrive as much. There wasn't as much of a demand for slavery and the huge profits that slavery created. Black Africans were bought and sold in New Brunswick in the 1700s. And in fact, here is a newspaper article from the Royal Gazette back on July 25th of 1786 regarding a runaway slave. So between July 15th and 21st, the fallen bound Negro Isaac, about 30 years old from New York, escaped wearing a blue coat, round hat with Ben. I think they were on a boat, like a jacket. Also Nancy, a woman, took her Negro child about 4 years old called Lidge before going to Maryland. All persons are hereby forbidden to harbor any of the above Negroes, and all matters of vessels are forbidden to take any of them on board their vessel, as they shall suffer the consequences. A reward of 2 guineas will be paid for each of the men, and $6 for each Negro woman by Mr. Thomas Jennings, taken and delivered to him at the city of St. John at York Point. So, we were able to get this stuff in the news a few years back, Toronto Star, the Telegraph Journal. I do recall, not as much today, but many people back in the day denying that slavery existed. So just to the people here, oh, that's the same one. Oh, okay, so we just have those two. Yeah, so I just wanted to show you all that, as I mentioned. Current racial climate of New Brunswick. I remember 6 or 7 years ago seeing advertisements on YouTube from the New Brunswick government encouraging people to be less racist. It was funny. They didn't use those words, but they were saying, you know, New Brunswick needs immigration. If we are to survive and thrive, we need to open our minds to immigration. We need to bring people into this province, and when they get here, you know, we need to accept them. We need to let them know they're welcome. I found it very shocking to know that the government had to use paid advertising to try to convince the public that immigration was okay, that they were going to start literally marketing around the world to bring more people here to help support our struggling economy and healthcare system, schools, dwindling numbers. Of course, unlike refugees, to immigrate here is quite expensive. It takes a considerable investment. Usually people who immigrate here have a considerable amount of money. They will usually have to invest in a business or make some huge contribution to the province, so bolstering up our tax dollars and such like that. But the current racial climate is that, yeah, immigration is happening. It was really interesting to hear your stories about growing up and never seeing a black person. I think many people share that story. When I came here in '99, I'll personally say when I visited, I'd never experienced racism here, whether intentional or not, whether just from lack of exposure to other cultures. I had been called the N-word more in New Brunswick just visiting than I'd ever been called in Toronto my whole life. But I'd say it's changing a little bit. We're getting more diverse. So many people come from East India, the Philippines, Jamaica, South America, and such. But I know, Hillary, do you want to speak about the stuff?
I was just trying to look up. I'm pretty sure that what had been reported by CBC was that in last year by Stats Canada, we had received almost an influx of 20,000 people statistically in our population. The majority of that being immigrants, whether it was, some of our friends who have come who are actually just from Scarborough, or whether they had come from, much further away and were refugees, be it from any of the issues going on globally. But the fact of the matter is that the current racial climate is one of the most diverse we've ever been. And I think the important thing about doing these talks is hopefully we get to a place of much less ignorance where we're all able to come together and learn and educate and understand. Which circles back to my favorite thing to discuss. I have a very big passion about Manju Pharma, and as the commissioner for Manju Pharma. So she is the woman who was the commissioner of systemic racism for our province, and she released a report with 86 recommendations. And of those 86 recommendations, I believe only one has been applied. The whole goal of this document is to try to help understand that there is systemic racism, that it exists, and what things that we can be doing about it. And with the few minutes we have left, I just want to highlight that in the document, from recommendations 25 to 34, are all about increasing Black historical and racial historical education for the education department in New Brunswick, French and English. Number 25 is about greater financial support for the creation of anti-racism resources. Number 27 is to mandate anti-racism perspectives into the school improvement plan. Number 30 is to develop a province-wide anti-racism policy for all schools. Recommendation 31 is to have anti-racism education for anybody getting a Bachelor of Education at any of the New Brunswick universities. The most important one I want to highlight is that recommendation number 1 was that government of New Brunswick senior leaders and elected officials understand what systemic racism is. We give these talks so that people understand that systemic racism exists. It is not any white person's fault, it's not a Black person's fault, it's no one's fault. Systems are in place that have benefited white people in this country, and we just want to be able to benefit sometimes too. And it's no one's fault, but we can all work together to try to champion that change. And it does start with education, and it starts with educating Blaine Higgs' government, and it starts with educating.
Good luck.
Ben, I'll see you on what you guys say. But it has to start somewhere, and it starts in rooms like this. And the part of the reason we're wrapping up here is thank you so much for coming and listening and being part of the conversation. And we hope that these conversations trickle into, when you're telling people about your day, so that we can get to a place where we have an educated government. And so that people understand that racism existed, slavery existed here, the KKK was and is here, and unless we are all educated, we're not going to get to a better place where there is peace and love, and we're all singing Kumbaya. There is no fire in Kumbaya if we don't, educate the people.
Absolutely, yeah. The point of presentations like this is never to place blame or make anyone feel guilty, but the reality is the reality. And we truly believe at Black Atlantic through exposure therapy. We help to break down previous conceptions or ideologies or just impressions about other communities. When I moved here, I often used to joke that I felt that high-speed internet was like God's gift to New Brunswick, because before that, the kind of exposure that many people would have to visible minorities, people of color, Black people, whatever you want to call us, was through the TV show Cops, or through rap music and such like that. And we are so much more than just that. My final thought escaped my mind, unfortunately. But
do you intend to write a book on this?
Who knows? Who knows what's in store? Who knows what's in store? But
I would say at this point, we're happy to be championing, the McCarthy family, who are historians from St. John, 6th and 7th generation, who intend to put this history in books. We're going to continue to run our mouths and podcast about it, absolutely. And if we get to a point where we can, champion a book about some of this stuff, we would love to, but we are more than thrilled to share the resources that already exist from the people who are 100% fact-checked. So we're trying our best.
Because Halifax has done quite a bit lately. What is it called?
For Africville?
Africville.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I've never been there, but
I have yet to go. I was invited, but it's a very, well, not really similar, but another deplorable situation that happened to the Black people who lived there. But they're, there's an Africville Museum now, and they're being definitely recognized as a community that has gone through significant hardships and is slowly coming out on the other end of that.
I remember my final thought, thankfully. Regarding a book, I think we'd be more likely that we would hope to, if we could ever obtain the funds to help support the writing of a book on at least historic communities by some of the people who live here and who actually are historians. But regarding my personal definition of systemic racism, racism doesn't necessarily exist in the way that is so obvious and noticeable as it used to be. It's not so overt. People aren't going around openly calling people the N-word, attacking and beating up and harassing and killing, dragging, hanging and dragging by a tow truck. The way systemic racism exists more nowadays is that, people in positions of power, at schools, at banks, in government organizations, if they have these views about people of culture and want to hold them back, it can exist more in forms of not getting access to loans, not being given the job opportunity because of their name, not getting the marks they deserve in school to help them get ahead if they want to go to university. It's very subtle. Racism has learned to kind of exist in the shadows, in which it's incredibly hard to prove. Dr. Timothy Christie, for years, has been advocating for racism to become considered criminal. Therefore, acts of racism would not have to be on the onus of the person who experienced racism through the Human Rights Commission, where I believe 70 to 80% of claims end up getting dropped because of how complicated it is, but on the taxpayer to prove racism. So, we champion people like that, we learn, but just food for thought. You're not going to see the kind of racism that you hear about on TV or hear about in history anymore. It's much more subtle.
no, because the children in the schools now are mostly international now, like in our school system. I think there's a lot of...
It's a growing number. I'm definitely still the minority and will probably always be the minority, but certainly increasing. And the more diversity, the more exposure, the more we understand that we live in a global world where we're all humans.
Well, because I know they're having more children. They're having like...
Oh yes, absolutely.
More children from Philippines and South America, and I think they're having more children than we are, so I don't know. I don't know the statistics or demographics.
I'd say we're probably a couple centuries away from not being a minority in this province or whatever, but I do understand what you're saying, and I agree. Pardon?
I said maybe only a couple. With the housing market, all the Black people are just going to come from Toronto. I'm next, don't worry. I'll be back.
And we look forward to a time where it doesn't matter. We don't really think about it or
so
not.
what if
That's the goal.
Yeah, because it's not because the category, it's from the, mind and heart. It's not because we're reproducing,
Words.
Yes.
And I think that's...
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is...
Once again, it's Hillary LeBlanc and Quentin Davis from blackmagic.ca. One or more, please check us out and contact us. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you so much for coming.